We've done a number of episodes on the channel about Ford-class aircraft carriers over the last few years, including one with Captain Tal Manville, who was the Ford's first class desk officer and involved in the various alternatives the Navy was considering as the replacement for Nimitz class, and one where we actually went aboard Ford to talk to the commander of Naval Air Force Atlantic, Rear Admiral Doug Verissimo, about the lead ship's first full deployment. The Ford class has recently come under fire from the Hill. As pointed out in friend of the channel Brian McGrath's recent conservative Wahoo Substack, Congressman Ken Calvert, a Republican who represents California's 41st District and who serves as the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee's Defense Subcommittee, said the following during an appearance at the American Enterprise Institute.
My friends that are submarine captains and Virginia-class submarines will say, on the outside, an aircraft carrier will last a week on a pure adversary. By the time we build an aircraft carrier, put its component F-35s and all the electronics and the 5,000 souls that we put on that, we're probably looking at well over $22, $23 billion. Right now we have, as you know, under the Ford class, we've got the Ford out there. We're going to have the JFK out pretty soon. We have the third aircraft carrier coming online. And these are 50-year decisions. Will an aircraft carrier be survivable in modern warfare when the Chinese right now have 1,200 operational hypersonic missiles that can be clustered and move at Mach 6, Mach 7? And if you shoot 100 of them at an aircraft carrier, will that aircraft carrier survive? And you got to ask that question. And so if they can't, then we have to make some difficult decisions. We made a decision to get rid of battleships a long time ago for a good reason. We need to be smaller, mobile, faster, and invisible. This is a new change in modern warfare.
For the record, California's 41st District is one of those with a weird shape created by years of gerrymandering and only has one military installation, the very small Naval Surface Warfare Center Corona Division. The district is also landlocked, so not to be too cynical about Calvert's point of view here, he doesn't have any constituents with skin in the aircraft carrier or carrier-based aviation game. His district's thing is tech, so during that same AEI conference he used the war in Ukraine as an example about how the modern battlefield has evolved to drone warfare. That's what Brian labels recency bias in his Substack, meaning that some military experts
I am skilled in the arts of war and military tactics, sire.
Tend to universally apply the trends from the latest conflict, regardless of how specific that conflict might be. The problem with asserting that all wars are drone wars in the future based on the conflict in Ukraine is that it ignores the ranges and speeds inherent to the high-end fight, particularly those associated with any war against China. It also assumes that a carrier operates without the other ships and aircraft in the strike group, which it does not. And in light of Donald Trump reassuming the role of commander-in-chief, it's worth revisiting the fact that he was suspect of the technology behind the electromagnetic aircraft launch system, better known by the EMALS acronym. Here are the comments he made to the crew of the USS Wasp, an amphibious assault ship, while touring installations in Japan during his first term.
Question, catapult, right? The catapult system. Do you like electric or steam? Steam. Steam. Who said electric? There's one guy back there. Okay, I really need this information because, you know, we're building carriers, we're building one. They're using an electric catapult and an electric elevator. Number one, I can't imagine in the case of battle, it must be very delicate, okay? And, you know, steam's only worked for about 65 years perfectly. And I won't tell you this because it's before my time by a little bit, but they have a $900 million cost overrun on this crazy electric catapult. I said, what was wrong with steam? I would like to know, all of the folks that know exactly what I'm talking about, the catapult system, steam or electric, ready? Steam, electric, he works for the enemy. He's all right. Well, you might be in danger. I better be careful. No, we want to go with steam. You know, they're always coming up with new ideas. They're making planes so complex you can't fly them. You know that. No, I admit, they want to show next. And we all want innovation, but it's too much. But there's never been anything like the steam catapults. And I went to the Gerald Ford, which is under construction now for a long time. They're having a problem with their electric catapult. And I was talking to the catapult people, and they said, steam. In the meantime, we're spending all that money on electric, and nobody knows what it's going to be like in bad conditions. You understand? So I think I'm going to put an order. When we build a new aircraft carrier, we're going to use steam. I'm going to just put out an order. We're going to use steam. We don't need that extra speed. You know, they were saying, one of the folks said, no, the electric works faster. But, sir, we can only get the plane there every couple of minutes. So really, what they did was wrong. And we make mistakes, but generally speaking, we get it right. But when we make them, we have to correct them. So we're going to put out an order. We want to use steam.
For the record, Trump is polling the crew on their opinion about catapults, even though the USS Wasp has none. And then later, while making the rounds offering holiday greetings to commands around the world, the president had this exchange with the CEO of the USS Ronald Reagan.
From the U.S. Navy, we have the commanding officer, Captain Pat Hannafin. And Pat, are you on the phone?
Yes, sir, I'm with you. And from the over 4,800 sailors and airmen aboard USS Ronald Reagan, the nation's only permanently forward-deployed aircraft carrier. We are currently in Victoria Harbor, Hong Kong, about 13 hours ahead of you. Still Thanksgiving here. And from all the sailors on board Reagan, serving peace through strength for America in the Indo-Pacific. We wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Well, that's great, Pat. I appreciate it very much, and say hello to everybody, and happy Thanksgiving to you. So the condition of the ship is A1?
Alpha 1, sir, absolutely.
Okay, good. Very important. So, you know, we have another big one. The Gerald Ford is going to be joining you pretty soon. How does this compare in size and scope with the Gerald Ford? You know all about that. That's the new one, right?
Yes, sir. Size and scope, a good friend of mine just left command of that. But size and scope about the same. Certainly some improvements there to the plants and a few of the radars, and even the catapults and gear are slightly different as well. But we'll push over 140 today daily.
Yeah, Pat, tell me about the catapult system. So on the Gerald Ford, they don't use steam, which is the first one that I've ever heard of that doesn't use steam. And I know they have some difficulties, which I'm not happy about, and they spent a lot of money. And I was just curious, the steam system is tried and true for many, many years, as long as we've had aircraft carriers. How do you find steam versus what they're doing on the Gerald Ford, which is electronic and digital, if you can believe it?
Yes, sir. All of our Nimitz super carriers have been using steam for decades, and we find it pretty reliable. However, the electromagnetic catapults that they're running there offer some great benefits. Obviously, like any new piece, you got to work through the bugs, but they offer some benefits not only to stress and strain on the aircraft to extend service life and other pieces. I have no doubt we'll work through that just as we work through all of our other advancements and continue to bring it to the enemy when called to do so.
So when you do the new carriers, as we do and as we're thinking about doing, would you go with steam or would you go with electromagnetic? Because steam is very reliable. And the electromagnetic, I mean, unfortunately, you have to be Albert Einstein to really work it properly. What would you do?
Yes, sir. You sort of have to be Albert Einstein to run the nuclear power plants that we have here as well, but we're doing that very well. I would go, sir, Mr. President, I would go electromagnetic cats. I think that's the way to go. We do pay a heavy cost for transiting the steam around the ship.
Good. Okay. I like to hear that. I'm actually happy about that answer.
EMALS was just one of several dozen new technologies that were added to Ford, which caused cost overruns and construction delays. Here's how Captain Tal Manville frames it in the Secrets of the Ford-class episode.
Interesting enough, in 1998, when I was asked by the three-star Chief of Staff of the Navy what the cost was for the expanded capabilities, the estimate of my cost engineers was $13.5 billion. Now, when I told that to that three-star admiral, he wasn't happy with me, okay? And then he told us, we can't afford that because the Navy had to figure out how to get the money. And at that time, we couldn't, so we had to come up with an evolutionary approach. And actually, we then came up with a three-step process that would have been the last of the Nimitz class, and then the first, which was CVN, back then 21, or CVN 78, that became the Ford. That would only get the new nuclear plant, the new catapult, and the new dual band radar. And then the other 12 technologies would wait to go on to the next carrier, and that would be the full up round expanded capabilities, which was now CVN 79. That kind of changed right around with the change of the administration where Donald Rumsfeld became the Secretary of Defense. He wanted to transform the military. And in doing so, he fell in love with the vision. He was a former naval aviator, and he liked the vision that my team put together that became the expanded capabilities, okay? And with the island back aft. But then 9/11 interrupted it, and we stopped funding 12 of the 15 new technologies. And we didn't get a chance to get back in to see Rumsfeld until well after 9/11. And then he said, I want all the eggs in one basket. He wanted on the first carrier. He asked the question, how do I know that it's going to cost less if I spread it out over these three ships? I want time is money, money is time. I want it now, all on the first ship. The problem was he turned it over to Dr. Wolfowitz, who didn't know anything about budgeting, and so we were constantly behind. The program was constantly behind the R&D. And not only that, but they were also being very optimistic with their estimates. And typically what we learned down at the Defense Acquisition School is that it takes 12 to 15 years to bring new technology into it. And when we put 15, we put that ship in overload. But as it turns out, I think Mr. Rumsfeld did us a favor because the Kennedy is still has another 2 years in the shipyard, and then it's going to have another 2 years of testing before it's ready to be in the fleet. And by putting all the eggs in one basket, even though I had been sticking voodoo pins into a doll, said Donald, he has in fact got that vision into the fleet faster than the three-step process that the Navy wanted because it was more affordable that way.
But the pain definitely came at the cost of Ford.
Yes.
And the CNO Gilday has said that putting that many new technologies, you had 15, it grew to 23 on the first ship in a class was what caused all of the pain. So what's the status of the Ford-class program now? Well, the Congressional Research Service has just released a full report on it. Here are some things to note from that report. The Navy's current aircraft carrier force consists of 11 CVNs, which is the designation for nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, including 10 Nimitz-class ships, CVNs 68 through 77, that entered service between 1975 and 2009, and one Gerald R. Ford CVN 78-class ship that was commissioned into service on July 22, 2017. The requirement for the Navy to maintain not less than a certain number of operational aircraft carriers was established as part of the FY 2006 National Defense Authorization Act, which set the number at 12 carriers. The requirement was changed from 12 to 11 by the John Warner National Defense Authorization Act on October 17, 2006. A footnote to that law is the carrier force dropped from 11 to 10 ships between December 1, 2012, when Enterprise CVN 65 was inactivated, and July 22, 2017, when CVN 78 was commissioned into service. Anticipating the gap between the inactivation of Enterprise and the commissioning of Ford, the Navy asked Congress for a temporary waiver of the law to accommodate the period between the two events. And of course, you need airplanes to go on aircraft carriers, so as codified in the fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, Congress requires the Navy to maintain at least 9 carrier air wings. We'll leave the details of that to our forthcoming conversation with the Navy's Director of Air Warfare early next month at the Pentagon. So with 11 carriers as the requirement, let's look at the Ford-class procurement schedule as detailed in this CRS report. Now, as with everything in defense procurement, this starts to get complicated, so stick with me here. The report states, The aircraft carriers CVN-78 through CVN-83 are the first 6 ships in the Navy's new Gerald R. Ford class of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. And remember, the U.S. government's fiscal year starts in October of the year prior to the year in question. The FY 2025 budget requests about $2.1 billion in procurement funding for Ford-class ships, including $236 million for CVN-79, which is the Kennedy, about $1.2 billion for CVN-80, which is Enterprise, and $721 million for CVN-81, which is the Doris Miller, which honors the cook who manned a gun during the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1941. CVN-78 was procured in fiscal year 2008. The ship was commissioned into service on July 22, 2017, and achieved initial operational capability in December of 2021. The ship's first deployment began in October of 2022, more than 5 years after the ship was commissioned into service. CVN-79, again, the Kennedy, was procured in fiscal year 2013. The Navy's fiscal year 2025 budget submission states that the ship is scheduled for delivery in July of 2025. CVN-80 Enterprise was procured in fiscal year 2018. The Navy's fiscal year 2025 budget submission shows the ship's scheduled delivery date as September of 2029. CVN-81, the Miller, was procured in fiscal year 2020 and is scheduled for delivery to the Navy in February of 2032. The Navy's FY 2025 budget submission proposes deferring the procurement of the 5th ship in the class, CVN-82, the William J. Clinton, don't blame me, I didn't name these ships, by 2 years, from FY 2028 to FY 2030. CVN-83, which is the George W. Bush, again, not my idea, is projected for procurement in FY 2034 under the Navy's FY 2025 30-year shipbuilding plan. So to summarize, it took Ford about 14 years to go from procurement to deployable asset, not just a delivered asset, but a deployable one, and it looks like it'll take Kennedy and Miller about 13 years or more to do the same thing. CVNs 82 and 83, Clinton and Bush, are in the plan but are currently unfunded. All U.S. Navy aircraft carriers procured since 1958 have been built by Huntington Ingalls Industries / Newport News Shipbuilding of Newport News, Virginia. HII is the only U.S. shipyard that can build large-deck nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. And of course, HII won't start building an aircraft carrier until it's actually funded. Meanwhile, the first ships in the Nimitz class are entering the decommissioning phase, starting with Nimitz this year. Nimitz will leave the Navy's deployable inventory before Kennedy is added to it. In the interim, that means the Navy will need another waiver from Congress to go down to 10 carriers. That cycle will repeat itself when Eisenhower retires in 2027 before Enterprise arrives in 2029. Assuming a 50-year lifespan, Vinson will retire in 2033, a year after Miller is added to the deployable carrier inventory. So for a short period, the Navy will have 12 carriers until Theodore Roosevelt retires in 2039. After that, as of the budget picture right now, all bets are off. Let's assume Clinton and Bush are procured in accordance with the Navy's fiscal year 25 30-year shipbuilding plan. Using the average Ford-class construction timeframe between procurement and maiden operational deployment, that means Clinton won't reach the fleet until 2043 and Bush won't get there until 2047. By that time, there will only be 3 Nimitz-class carriers left, Truman, Reagan, and Bush, which will give the Navy 9 aircraft carriers total. And oh, by the way, 2 of them will be named Bush. The Navy's current shipbuilding horizon does not include any Ford-class construction after CVN-83, so unless the procurement plan adds additional ones after fiscal year 2034, by the middle of this century, U.S. Navy supercarriers will start to go the way of the battleship, as Representative Calvert suggests. And that reality could happen sooner, as there are a lot of budget cycles between now and 2030, so Clinton and Bush may not even make it to the procurement phase of construction. If that happens, the Navy will be down to 8 carriers by 2040 and then incrementally down to 4 after CVN-77, the last Nimitz-class carrier, decommissions in 2061 or so. If Miller winds up being the last Ford-class carrier, it would last until 2083, and if Bush is the last one, it would last until 2097. In the years between now and the turn of the next century, military technology will surely evolve. It's realistic to believe that eventually things like drones and AI will mature to the point where they could replace the role currently played by carrier strike groups. However, Congressman Calvert is not the first to predict the death of aircraft carriers. Experts did it in the decades leading up to World War II, only to be proved wrong by how the U.S. Navy prevailed in the Pacific Theater. After that war, the fledgling U.S. Air Force intimated that because of the capability of long-range bombers like the B-36, that aircraft carriers had lost their utility because any future war would be fought with nuclear weapons. The use of aircraft carriers in the years since that time, including contingency operations like Desert Storm, have proved that that opinion was wrong. Now, currently, to carry out the orders of the National Command Authority, the Joint Force requires sea-based air power to provide presence and to conduct strikes, air warfare, and surveillance. Sea-based air power serves as a key enabler of other Joint Force components necessary for presence as well as victory in high-end conflict. This demand is increasing, not decreasing. The carrier strike group, with the large nuclear-powered aircraft carrier at its core, remains the most effective and efficient means of providing these capabilities across the range of military options. 2024 was an eventful year for carrier aviation, most acutely in the CENTCOM area of responsibility while operating in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. Carriers Eisenhower, Roosevelt, Lincoln, and Truman all conducted strikes against regional hostile forces in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, while also participating in Operation Prosperity Guardian, which is dedicated to keeping vital sea lanes open. Those operations were unique and unprecedented, and carrier strike groups demonstrated their worth against the threat. At the same time, China demonstrated a shipbuilding capacity that's exponentially faster than that of the United States, and the ability to deploy those ships at longer ranges for greater periods of time than they previously could. They revealed the existence of a sixth-generation aircraft that's actually flying already. Those things, along with provocative acts at sea and in the skies, show that the Pentagon's pacing high-end threat is growing. And until technology eclipses current capabilities, that threat is best countered by U.S. Navy carrier strike groups, the cornerstone of which is the aircraft carrier. At the end of his conservative Wahoo Substack, Brian makes what I consider to be a brilliant point, and that point is this. Based on how carriers have been employed in recent months in multiple AORs, quote, the carrier is clearly not obsolete in this moment and for the foreseeable future. And to repeat what I've said for many years now about carrier obsolescence, I do not know when that day will come, but I am certain of one thing. The day before carriers become obsolete, land-based aircraft will have become obsolete. Because an airfield that can deploy air power while moving from place to place will always have more combat utility than a fixed airbase, end quote. All right, that'll do it for this episode. As we have for the last 4 years, we'll continue to cover this among other topics going forward. So if you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything. And I'll be in San Diego this week at the Naval Institute's West Convention at the Convention Center downtown. On Tuesday, January 28th, I'll be at the Naval Institute's booth, which is number 1341, right in the middle of the main exhibition hall, signing Punk's War, Punk's Wing, and Punk's Fight from 11:30 to 1. And then on Wednesday, January 29th at 0945, I'm moderating a high-powered panel on the future of carrier aviation, including the issues raised in this episode at the Sharpening Our Competitive Edge stage in Hall C. Come on out and hear the Admiral's responses to the hard questions, and then stick around afterwards to say hi. I'd love to see you there. In the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.